Unfortunately, because we're running a bit delayed, my remarks are going to be very, very quick. I'm basically just here to welcome you all. Say that it's wonderful for everybody to have come out. We truly appreciate every time the Federation of Cuban Women come, which is yearly, because they do something called the Commission of the Status of Women at the UN. And every year they come to the UN and they let the world know through the UN how much Cuba has done for the empowerment and the advancement of women. Honestly, they put the US to shame. So every year when they're here, we make sure that we let their voices be heard to whoever is open to hearing it. And so we try to organize a variety of events, see them yearly. This is now our third conference that we did. For 2 years, the pandemic put it back, and then we had one last year at the People's Forum, which was small because we had limited space, where our friends from Seattle and Cindy and Luna and were there. And we're back again. And this one is on a better scale, although we're running delayed. So thank you everybody for coming. I want to introduce my co-chair. Anushka Sarkar is a first-year student at Fordham Law School. She is a Stein Scholar of Public Interest, Law, and Ethics. She's as passionate about protecting and strengthening workers' power. Anushka works with the Amazon Labor Union as a law clerk and is a 2023 Peggy Brown Fund Fellow with the Workers' Rights Clinic of Washington's Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights. She's done a lot of other stuff. She's fought for drafting legislation and proposing things for that an after-school program in DC Council intended to divert girls and non-binary children in DC public schools from the school to prison pipeline. She's also organized multiple unions, published op-eds on democracy issues ranging from state voting rights legislation to US Supreme Court expansion. She hails from Michigan State and is a proud graduate of the University of Michigan, where she served as student body president during her senior year. Anushka is going to.
Everyone. Good afternoon. I know sleepy. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Erin. My name is Anushka Sarkar. I use she, her pronouns. I am a first-year law student here at Fordham. I am a first-year representative with the National Lawyers Guild, and it is my honor to be here today with all of you in solidarity with fearless activists and leaders from all over the world, from Cuba to Ethiopia to Canada to New York. Thank you so much for being here today. I want to begin our conversation today by thanking our inspiring panelists and all of you in attendance today. Thank you for your tireless work to better our countries and our communities. Thank you for your unrelenting courage to seek better tomorrows for all of us. And thank you for your unwavering commitment to the truth, which is that better tomorrows await us so long as we seek them out. Today's conversation will span many issues. We will hear from amazing women and other people today about the inspiring advancements for gender equality in Cuba since the revolution, and about Cuba's 2022 Family Code referendum, which codified major social and economic wins for LGBTQ people in Cuba, and how the rest of us around the world can take lessons from Cuba and realize them in our own countries. Here in the United States, we have much to learn from the movement for gender equality in Cuba. We've come far here, but not far enough. In the United States, more than 22 million people who may become pregnant of reproductive age live in states where abortion access is heavily restricted or totally inaccessible. The maternal mortality rate in the United States is over 3 times the rate in most other high-income countries, with almost 24 maternal deaths for every 100,000 live births. What's more, the maternal mortality rate for Black women in the United States is 55 deaths per 100,000 live births. 3 times women. Mortality rates have actually increased in recent years for Black and Hispanic women in the United States. But as we know, women are not plagued by birth and pregnancy alone in the United States. Women, particularly Black, Hispanic, and Native women in the United States, are disproportionately harmed by climate change and environmental injustices. Black, Hispanic, and Native women face the starkest wage gap in the United States, making pennies on the dollar compared to women and men across other races. And attacks on trans and gender non-conforming people in the United States have reached an all-time high, particularly against Black trans women. Worse still, nearly 400 bills are moving through state legislatures across our country that directly threaten the rights, dignity, and safety of LGBTQ. As I've said, we've come far, but not far enough. Against this backdrop of state-sponsored attacks on women, girls, and people of marginalized gender in the United States, we turn to our friends and fellow activists in Cuba who have worked tirelessly to realize these better tomorrows. I'm eager to learn from each of you today, and thank you for your time and leadership. Erin, I'll hand things back over to you to introduce.
Thank you.
Ms. Maida.
That's terrific.
Mike, for any here that you can use a little more.
The first, well, I think it's, Allison, it's on, I think it's. It is. I didn't know. It seems to be on. It seems to be on. It seems to be on. I will try to speak louder, but Osmaida, we should be wary because I'm not sure why it's not working better, and I don't want to touch things because I'm old school. Okay, I'd like to introduce Osmaida Hernandez, who is a member of the National Secretariat at Cuban Women's Federation, the FMC, and the FMC's Director of International Relations. Osmaida? Sorry, we're doing everything. So, is Allison in here? Did Allison go back out? I think so. Okay, this seems to be live, but I'm not sure why it's not responding. Maybe, I mean, I don't know.
I think you have to stand near the mic too.
Is it possible to move?
You have a louder voice. You have a louder voice. Is it possible to do what? You want to share?
Why don't I try it here? It's not a big room. I'll try to speak loudly, not loud for a speaker.
Buenas tardes,
Good afternoon.
muchas gracias por esta oportunidad.
Thank you for this
Queremos
opportunity.
agradecer infinitamente en nombre de todas las mujeres cubanas el esfuerzo y todo lo que hacen en pos de lograr la solidaridad con Cuba.
I want to thank on behalf of all the women, your efforts here in favor of solidarity with Cuba.
Queremos hablar, traía este hermoso libro, que es un compendio de las intervenciones de nuestro comandante en jefe en todos los congresos de la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas. Y quería también ponerlos a su disposición.
So I wanted to mention in my talk this wonderful book, which is a compilation of all the speeches that our commander-in-chief has given to the congresses of the Cuban Women's Federation over the years that hope we can make available for them.
Es importante hablarles muy brevemente cuáles eran las condiciones de las mujeres antes del triunfo de la revolución y qué significó la revolución triunfante del 1 de enero del 59 para el pueblo, pero especialmente para las mujeres.
I wanted to just outline briefly what were the actual conditions facing women before the revolution, and then what changed with the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959 for both the Cuban people and especially for women.
Y es que precisamente al tomar el pueblo el poder el 1 de enero de 1959, se transforman de manera radical las estructuras económicas, políticas y sociales del país.
And when the people took power on January 1st, 1959, it led to a radical transformation of all the structures in our country, economic, political, and social.
A partir de ese momento, nosotras decimos que se hizo realidad la dignidad plena de cada cubano y de cada cubano, que se les respete y ejercer los derechos humanos que defienden.
We like to say that from that moment on, we were able to fulfill the dignity, the full dignity of all Cubans and their exercise of and enjoyment of human rights.
La mujer en Cuba ha sido, desde ese momento, sujeto activo y principal beneficiario de todas las conquistas de la revolución.
And from that point on, Cuban women beneficiaries of all the changes and programs that have taken place in Cuba.
Y es que como parte de la lucha por la justicia social, se inició la batalla por el ejercicio pleno de la igualdad de los derechos y oportunidades de las mujeres en todos los ámbitos y a todos los niveles de la vida nacional.
And in that fight for a more just society that has led to the advances in the equality of equal rights and opportunities for women in all aspects, in all spheres of life.
El gobierno revolucionario cubano desde el año 1959 adoptó una serie de medidas legislativas, judiciales y administrativas que garantizaron de manera inmediata el cumplimiento de los derechos humanos fundamentales de todo el pueblo y en particular de las mujeres, las niñas, los niños y las personas en situación de vulnerabilidad.
The revolutionary government beginning in 1959 carried out a series of measures on the legislative, judicial, and administrative level, establishing immediate guarantees for the human rights of the Cuban people, and including for women, for children, and for people in a vulnerable situation.
Fueron creando las bases que eran necesarias para poder implementar y sustentar estos principios, entre los cuales ocupó un lugar prioritario luchar por erradicar cualquier tipo de desigualdad o de discriminación, entre ellas la originada por motivos de sexo.
And through this process, we began creating the necessary foundations to implement our principles, which was to eliminate the fight to eradicate all inequalities and discrimination, including on the basis of sex.
Yo creo que es importante subrayar que la ley de reforma agraria, que fue una de las primeras leyes que se aprobaron por el gobierno revolucionario, estamos hablando del 17 de mayo del año 1959, otorgó el derecho a la propiedad de la tierra a mujeres y a hombres. Y como demostración,
And I wanted to underline that the agrarian reform law that was implemented on May 17th, 1959, granted the right to property, to land, to both men and women.
como respeto a esa demostración de igualdad, el primer título que se entregó de la tierra se le entregó a una campesina negra, descendiente de inmigrantes haitianos asentados en la zona más oriental de nuestro país.
And as to capture the significance of what the agrarian reform law represented, the very first land title that was issued by the revolutionary government was given to a Black peasant woman, a descendant of Haitian immigrants in Eastern Cuba.
Desde entonces, tenemos que decirlo así, se ha ido desarrollando y perfeccionando una legislación que proscribe y que ha fortalecido la lucha contra la discriminación por cualquier motivo, haciendo de la igualdad de mujeres y hombres uno de los principios fundamentales de nuestra sociedad.
And we can say that then from that point on, we can say that laws have been progressively instituted to prohibit discrimination in all areas facing women as well as men.
Y en todo este proceso ha jugado un papel muy importante la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas.
And in this entire process, the Federation of Cuban Women has played a fundamental role.
Una organización creada por voluntad propia de las mujeres en fecha tan temprano como el 23 de agosto de 1960.
The Federation of Cuban Women was created through the desire and determination of the women themselves, and was founded on el 28 de agosto,
23 de agosto.
23 de agosto del,
1960.
and was founded on August 23rd, 1960.
Y que tengo el honor y que me acompañen todas las compañeras que integran la delegación de ser miembro de esta organización.
And I have the honor of being a member of that organization along with all the compañeras that accompany me here today.
Esta organización agrupa en su seno a mujeres procedentes de todos los sectores sociales.
The FMC organizes women coming from all social sectors, all sectors of
con
society,
independencia del color de la piel o de creencias religiosas,
regardless of skin color or religious beliefs,
con independencia de su orientación sexual o su identidad.
regardless of sexual identity and orientation.
Y es una organización que representa la voluntad y los intereses de la mayoría de las cubanas.
And it's an organization that represents the will and the interests of the vast majority of Cuban
Y
women.
decimos que representa los intereses de la mayoría de las cubanas porque el 91% de las mujeres cubanas mayores de 14 años integran la Federación de Mujeres.
And I say that it represents the interests of the vast majority of Cuban women because 90%, 95% of Cuban women are over the age of 14 are members of.
Estamos hablando de 4.300.000.
We're talking about 4,300,000 women.
Es la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas el mecanismo nacional para el adelanto de las mujeres.
And the FMC is the national vehicle or mechanism for the advancement of women in
Y
Cuba.
tiene entre sus objetivos fundacionales
And it has among its founding goals
defender la revolución que ha sido el primer programa de igualdad que hemos disfrutado las mujeres cubanas.
and it has its objective, its main objective, the defense of the Cuban Revolution, which we say was the first program for equality for women.
Lograr la plena igualdad de las mujeres,
The full equality for women.
la plena igualdad de oportunidades y posibilidades en todos los ámbitos y niveles.
Full opportunities and openings for women at all levels.
La Federación de Mujeres Cubanas ha sido y es un factor decisivo en la iniciativa para lograr la materialización de las leyes en beneficio de las mujeres.
And the FMC has been a decisive factor in in carrying out and implementing laws that favor women.
Cuba puede mostrar estadísticas que reflejan realidades bien diferentes quizás a las que viven mujeres, muchas mujeres en el mundo.
Cuba can offer statistics that show very different conditions from those facing women in other parts of the world.
En áreas, por ejemplo, como la salud,
In areas such as
la
healthcare,
educación,
education,
la cultura,
culture,
la seguridad y
safety,
la asistencia social,
and social
en la
security,
ciencia, la tecnología,
in science and technology,
el deporte,
sports,
en todos los niveles del quehacer nacional.
at all levels of Cuban society.
Y nosotras hoy podemos afirmar que las mujeres han participado de manera activa y permanente en la vida política, económica y social de nuestra sociedad.
And we can assert that women play an active role in Cuban political, social, and economic activities in our
No
country.
solo como beneficiarias, sino como protagonistas.
Not only as beneficiaries, but as active participants.
De los adelantos de las mujeres en Cuba, deja constancia el hecho de que son el 53,22% de los miembros de la Asamblea Nacional del Poder Popular.
As one indication or indicator of the advances of women, women represent 53.22% of the members of the National Assembly of Cuba, the legislature.
Siendo el segundo parlamento del mundo con mayor participación femenina.
And representing in the world, among countries in the world, the second highest number of women parliamentarians.
Cuba tiene uno de los parlamentos más grandes del mundo, también es importante decir.
Cuba has also one of the largest parliaments in the world.
El parlamento vigente hasta el momento tiene 605 diputados, 313 son mujeres.
The Cuban parliament today has 605 deputies, out of which 313 are women.
También es importante decirle que las mujeres constituyen el 48,4% de los integrantes del Consejo de Estado.
I can also say that the women represent 48.4% of members of the Council of State.
El 60% de los graduados universitarios. 60% de los graduados a nivel superior.
60% of university graduates.
El 67% de los técnicos y profesionales de todo el país.
67% of all technical and professional workers in the country.
Podría decir con certeza que el sector femenino es protagonista en casi todos los ámbitos de la sociedad.
We can say definitively that women are protagonists, are leading actors in all areas of
Ya las mujeres
life.
han alcanzado la paridad en la fuerza laboral en el sector estatal civil.
Women have achieved parity in the state labor force.
Son el 81% de los profesores y maestros. 81 de los profesores, los maestros y científicos.
Women are 81% of all professors and teachers and scientists.
Las mujeres en Cuba son el 80% de los fiscales.
Women are 81% of prosecutors.
Que incluye los presidentes, los tribunales provinciales, los jueces.
That includes the presidents of the provincial courts and judges.
Es decir, que la aplicación de la justicia está en manos de las mujeres.
So that means that the carrying out of justice is in the hands of women.
Yo quiero también hablarles un poco del proceso eleccionario el cual Cuba está inmersa en estos momentos.
I'd like to say a few words about the electoral process that Cuba is in the midst of today.
Un proceso que demuestra el carácter democrático y de participación ciudadana de nuestra sociedad.
A process that demonstrates the democratic character and the role of civil participation, or of citizens participating in society.
Y es importante decirles que de 5.484 delegadas de circunscripción, de 5.484 circunscripciones.
That out of 5,484 delegates on a local level,
Las mujeres hoy representan el 44,12%. 44,12%.
Women represent 44.12% of
Y fueron mujeres que fueron elegidas desde el lugar donde viven, desde la comunidad, en voto directo y abierto.
And these women were elected directly from their communities and in a direct democratic vote.
De ellas
An
fueron
open,
fueron elegidas
an
como
open vote.
presidenta de las asambleas municipales del Poder Popular,
And those who were elected as presidents of municipal assemblies,
84 mujeres y 98 como vicepresidentas.
84 were elected as presidents and 98 as vice presidents.
Que cuando unimos esta cifra, podemos decirle que el 55% de las presidentas y vicepresidentas de las asambleas municipales son mujeres.
So we can say altogether that 55% of the presidents and vice presidents of the local assemblies of People's Power are women.
Cuba se prepara para un nuevo proceso de elecciones nacionales.
Cuba is preparing for a new series of municipal.
Por eso nuestra camiseta.
That's why our,
Sí.
we have our
Posible.
better as possible.
Y en este proceso de elecciones nacionales
And in this process of national elections,
están propuestas para ser diputadas a la Asamblea Nacional, es decir, ya son candidatas a diputadas a la Asamblea Nacional, la nueva Asamblea Nacional, el 55,3%.
and as of now, those who have been nominated as for deputies to the National Assembly,
Es decir, que supera la cifra de mujeres que hoy están en el Parlamento.
for candidates, deputy, that those who have been nominated for the National Assembly, 55.3 are, that's a higher percentage than the current composition of the National Assembly.
Y esta proporción que he afirmado no corresponde a una ley de cuotas.
And these levels of representation are not due to application of quotas,
Sino al lugar y al derecho y al esfuerzo propio que ha sabido ganarse la mujer cubana.
they're due to the efforts and assertion of rights of women themselves,
Quien ha contado además con un respaldo incondicional de nuestro gobierno.
women who have enjoyed the unconditional support of our government.
Cuba, para garantizar que todos estos derechos que no retroceder en los derechos alcanzados,
In order to guarantee there is no retreat on the rights that have been gained,
cuenta con una estrategia nacional de desarrollo.
Cuba has a national strategy of development, as it's called.
Que por supuesto incluye la ejecución armónica y articulada de programas que van dirigidos a fortalecer todo lo relacionado con la igualdad de género.
And so there's a coordination of programs that reinforce each other to guarantee that are to promote gender equality.
Yo creo que es importante también decirles que las mujeres cubanas perciben igual salario que los hombres por trabajo de igual valor.
And I should add that women receive equal pay for equal work or work of the same kind.
Las mujeres cubanas de igual manera tienen derecho a licencia de maternidad que es retribuida hasta 1 año después de nacido el bebé.
Women enjoy the right to maternity leave, paid maternity leave, for 1 year after the birth of their child.
Las mujeres además cuentan con acceso gratuito a todos los servicios de la educación y la salud.
Women also enjoy free access to all health and education services.
Las mujeres en Cuba también tienen derecho al aborto seguro, gratuito y universal.
Women also enjoy the full right to abortion, legal, safe, and free access to abortion.
Las mujeres cubanas también gozan y disfrutan de derechos sexuales y reproductivos.
Women also enjoy sexual rights.
Y ahorita se hablaba del tema de la tasa de natalidad, de mortalidad infantil. Y en Cuba, el 99% de los partos se realizan en instituciones de salud.
And in terms of maternal and children's health, 99% of births are carried out in hospitals.
Al cierre del 2023, Cuba cerró con una tasa de mortalidad infantil de 7 por cada 100,000 nacidos vivos.
And the latest figures of infant mortality is that it's down to 7 deaths per 100,000 live births.
Es alta con relación a otros indicadores que hemos tenido.
Which is high compared to other indicators that we've had.
Cuba llegó a cerrar su mortalidad infantil con 4 el año antes de la pandemia.
Before the pandemic, Cuba reached its lowest level of infant mortality in 2019 with 4. Statistic of 4.
Yo quiero decirles que la legislación en Cuba es sumamente clara en materia de protección de los derechos de las mujeres.
Cuban law is very clear in terms of protecting the rights of women.
Y yo les hablaba ahorita de la ley de maternidad.
I was telling you about the maternity law.
La ley de maternidad en Cuba se ha ido actualizando en la medida en que se ha ido necesitando.
And that law has been updated and brought up to date as needed over the course of time.
Por ejemplo, la nueva actualización, que es el decreto ley 56 de 2021.
For example, the latest version of that legislation, which is Law 56, adopted in 2021,
Amplió ya los derechos que tenían las madres trabajadoras y sus familias.
it broadened the rights of women workers and their families, the mother, of working mothers and their families.
Desde 2013, en la ley de maternidad, establece el derecho de los padres de acogerse a la ley de maternidad.
And since
2013.
Since 2013, the maternity leave law has been extended to fathers who can also enjoy maternity leave, those benefits.
Y de igual manera le otorgó derechos a las abuelas y abuelos trabajadores.
And it is also extended those leave benefits to grandparents.
Porque una situación muy particular ocurría en Cuba.
Because of a particular situation, conditions that exist in
Y es
Cuba.
que muchas abuelas dejaban de trabajar una vida activa laboralmente para cuidar los niños.
And it's the fact that many grandmothers would leave their jobs in order to be able to
Para que la mujer se incorporara al año después de
to
del
take
nacimiento
care
del bebé.
of their grandchildren to make it possible for the mother to work.
Pues esta nueva ley de maternidad le otorga el derecho a las abuelas o abuelos, ya sean maternos o paternos, de acogerse a la ley de maternidad, dar el bebé y recibir la pensión, el salario, la pensión establecida y poderse incorporar al trabajo, la madre.
So,
Pues sí, tengo.
sí, sí. So the law extends the maternity, what was originally the maternity leave to grandmothers and grandfathers of both maternal and paternal to take a leave and continue to receive their pension or their salary.
Pero tenemos que seguir trabajando para lograr que más hombres se incorporen, que acojan a la licencia de maternidad.
But we have to keep working to encourage more men to take advantage of the maternity.
Están
paternity.
así, pero todavía hay padres que no.
The law is there, but there's many fathers who still don't want to do that.
El patriarcado.
Yeah, they erase the patriarchy by a stroke of a pen.
Esta legislación establece que la embarazada deje de trabajar a las 34 semanas de embarazo.
The law allows for women who are pregnant to stop work after 34 weeks of pregnancy.
Y que reciban una licencia de maternidad de 18 semanas que están divididas en 6 antes del parto y 12 semanas después del parto.
And that leave for that period of 18 weeks is divided between 6 weeks before birth and 12 weeks after.
Y en todo ese periodo recibe la ayuda económica que se necesita.
And during that entire time, the mother receives the full economic benefits.
Para no seguir ahondando en la ley de maternidad. Seguimos. Bueno, son muchos los derechos que realmente disfrutan las cubanas.
There's a lot of rights that women enjoy in Cuba.
Y yo creo que más que seguir explicando, sería importante también que ustedes nos puedan preguntar y nosotras con mucho gusto les vamos a responder sobre cuáles son los derechos, cómo están protegidos los derechos de las mujeres cubanas en la legislación hoy.
And so rather than continue, I think it might be better to open it up for your questions and discussion, and then we can have an exchange and questions.
Y nosotros
on
refrendamos
rights of women, how they're implemented in the laws and so on.
que nuestra Constitución de la República
And I want to emphasize that our Constitution of the
reafirma ese principio de igualdad y no discriminación,
reaffirms that principle of equality and non-discrimination,
asegurando a las mujeres el ejercicio de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos y protegiéndolas de la violencia en cualquiera de sus formas.
assuring women of their sexual and reproductive rights and protection against violence, domestic violence.
Solo por poner un ejemplo,
Just to give an example,
uno de los artículos de la Constitución, el número 44,
Article 44 in our Constitution, for example,
la Constitución la pueden descargar también se puede descargar de la Gaceta.
and you can download the text of our Constitution from.
Expresa este artículo que las mujeres y el hombre gozan de iguales derechos en lo económico, en lo político, en lo social.
That article establishes that men and women have equal rights economically, politically, and socially.
Yo también quiero decirle que esta Constitución fue aprobada en 2019.
I should add that this Constitution was approved by the Cuban people in 2019.
Después de un amplio proceso de consulta popular y de referendo popular.
After a broad process of consultation, discussion, and ratification in a
Y
referendum.
que fue aprobado por el 86% de todos los.
It was approved by a vote of 86% in favor.
Y a partir de la aprobación de esa Carta Magna se ha ido actualizando toda la legislación en Cuba.
And on the basis of that Constitution, the whole body of Cuban laws has been updated to reflect the Constitution.
Y en ese proceso también de actualización, Cuba aprobó su agenda del Estado para el logro de la igualdad.
And as part of that updating, Cuba approved the state agenda for equality.
Y se aprobó por decreto presidencial el Programa Nacional para el Adelanto de las Mujeres.
And by presidential decree, Cuba adopted its national program for the advancement of women.
Y hablamos de la actualización de toda esta marco legislativo, todas estas leyes en medio de la pandemia.
And keep in mind that this updating of all our laws along these lines were done in the context of the pandemic conditions.
Cuando Cuba además se enfrentaba no solo a los impactos de esta pandemia, sino también al enfrentamiento a la actividad subversiva enemiga que trasciende las leyes del injusto, inhumano bloqueo del cual Cuba es víctima.
And this was at a time when Cuba faced a combination of the pandemic, the increase in subversive activity fostered by the United States, and the intensification of the inhumane blockade against Cuba.
Y esto es importante también resaltarlo. Es decir, eso demuestra la voluntad política de nuestro gobierno con la igualdad de género.
And that really underscores the political will and determination of the Cuban government to support gender equality.
También existen otras leyes y otros proyectos de leyes. Por ejemplo, se aprobó una estrategia integral para la prevención y atención a la violencia de género y en el escenario familiar.
There were other laws that I could mention. A strategy for the prevention and prohibition of gender violence within the family.
Se aprobó además un nuevo código penal.
A new penal code was adopted.
Se aprobó un nuevo código de las familias.
A new families code was adopted.
Por lo tanto, nosotras decimos que en Cuba las metas y los sueños de muchas mujeres en el mundo son realidades desde hace ya mucho tiempo para las cubanas.
And so we can say that the dreams and aspirations of women in many parts of the world have been realized in Cuba.
Que las
For many
políticas
years.
y que las políticas para garantizar el avance de las mujeres forman parte del programa de desarrollo social de nuestro país.
And that the policies for the advancement of women are part of the projections for the social advancement of our society.
Entonces no me voy a extender más porque ahorita casi que llegué al final, pero volví otra vez.
Well, I won't go on any longer because I came back to the beginning.
Porque yo creo que también nuestras compañeras que están aquí también tienen mucho que mostrar
I think our other compañeras here have a lot to offer us,
y también mucho que aprender
a lot to learn.
en esta tarde.
Before we bring up Nancy, who is from the jurist, I wanted to just introduce, we have two other Cuban friends just to say hello. Bertel, Marate, how do you say your last name, Bertel? Marante. Is also of the FMC. She's the International Relations Office. And we have Alicia Campos, a very old friend, coordinator of Latin America and Caribbean Regional Office of the Women's International Democratic Federation, of which the FMC is a member organization. Now, Nancy was going to come up. Nancy is the president of the Union of Cuban Jurists in Matanza, in the Matanzas province. She's going to speak on the grassroots efforts that had the Families Code, the work that was done in order to have the Families Code created and passed.
Bien, buenas tardes a todas y todos.
Good afternoon to everyone.
Es la primera vez que estoy en un escenario como este.
The first time I've been in an event quite like this.
Por tanto, me siento sumamente complacida
I'm very happy
y agradezco a la Unión de Juristas haberme dado la oportunidad de estar aquí con ustedes.
and I thank the Union of Jurists for giving me the opportunity to be here with you.
Osmaida hablaba de la cantidad de mujeres, de algunas de las mujeres juristas que habían en Cuba, es decir, de los porcientos de jueces y de juezas y fiscales.
Mayra had spoken about the percentage of women in the legal profession in Cuba, like prosecutors and judges and things like that.
Y la Unión de Juristas, por supuesto, se nutre de todos los juristas, es decir, de todos los sectores, del sector jurídico de la sociedad.
The Union of Jurists receives its nutrition, you can say, from all the different sectors of the legal professions in Cuba.
Es decir, abogados, notarios, registradores, cualquier operador del derecho.
It's lawyers, notaries, any sector of the legal profession in Cuba.
Donde las mujeres, como bien ella decía, somos mayoría.
Where, as it's been said, women are the majority.
Eso no es un sueño, es una realidad.
That's not a dream, that's the reality in Cuba today.
Y como ustedes se imaginarán, tener la justicia de las mujeres en la mano no es fácil para los hombres tampoco.
And you have to imagine that the legal system being in the hands of women is not so easy for men.
A ver, en Cuba, todos saben que ha habido un amplio proceso legislativo,
Everybody knows that there's a broad legislative process in Cuba.
porque era necesario atemperar a la realidad cubana la legislación, es decir, la vida iba más rápido que las leyes. Las leyes se habían quedado un poco atrás.
That is, the legal system had to be adjusted to the reality of Cuba. That is, things went more rapidly in Cuba and the legal system had to catch up.
Y en todo este proceso, por supuesto, hay un amplio mecanismo de consulta donde las mujeres tuvimos un papel fundamental.
So there was a broad process of consultation where women played an important role.
Y dentro de todas esas leyes que ya Osmaida refería, que se habían aprobado, yo diría que el colofón de todas ellas fue el Código de la Familia.
And of all of these different laws, which we've spoken here already, I think the high point was the Families Code.
Porque el Código de las Familias es el más sensible, es el que más aristas toca de toda la sociedad,
I think
no
this-
solo de las mujeres, sino de todos los problemas sociales, familiares.
I think it's the most sensitive, the most maybe complicated because it touches on all the different aspects of family life and relations in Cuba.
Donde tienen incidencia hombres, mujeres, niños, niñas, adolescentes, abuelas, abuelos, cuidadores, es decir, la familia completa en sociedad y se reconocieron además los distintos tipos de familias que existían ya en Cuba, pero que no tenían un reconocimiento legal.
So it touches on everything, on men, on women, on children, on grandparents, on caretakers, and all the different types of families that exist in Cuba today.
Por ejemplo, había una mujer que criaba una sobrina.
For example, there was a woman that raised her niece.
Para que comprendan por qué se transformó tan positivamente el Código de la Familia.
So you can understand why the Families Code was transformed so positively.
Se supone que la madre de esa sobrina, para seguir el ejemplo, la dejó y la abandonó.
We
Y
can,
esa tía la crió, o esa amiga, esa vecina, cualquiera.
so you can imagine the woman of that niece abandoned her. And so her aunt or her friend or whoever became the person to take care of her.
En el anterior código, si mamá aparecía, tenía todos los derechos.
So in the old code, if the mother died,
Llegaba,
she returned, she got all the rights.
ahora no.
Not
Ahora
now.
no. Ahora, si mamá abandonó y no se ocupó más, y usted la crió, y usted la educó, y usted logra demostrar que fue quien se ocupó de ella, con todo el derecho es suyo.
So now if the mother reappears, then that's not like that. If you're the one that took care of her, you're the one that raised her, you're the one that fed her, and you have all those rights.
Y eso es algo que además de resaltar aún más el papel de la mujer y darle más derechos y darle más igualdad, también equipara. Hay un equilibrio en la sociedad que pasa igual con los abuelos.
So now, where women's rights were defended, now in this new context, those rights also begin to take precedence, and you also have the rights, for example, of the grandparents.
Que siempre daban todo por los nietos, pero no tenían derechos. Los derechos eran de mamá y papá.
They always gave everything for their grandchildren, but all the rights were to the parents.
Ahora no, ahora los abuelos tienen derechos fundamentales sobre los nietos. Y eso fue algo muy positivo en Cuba con esta modificación del Código de la Familia.
So now the grandparents have full rights, and that's an aspect that's very positive in the new Families Code.
Creo que con lo que dijo Osmaida, que dio muchos elementos y dio muchos detalles de cómo estamos las mujeres, es decir, de cómo somos reconocidas realmente, es decir, que es una realidad. Y
With all the examples that Osmira gave of all of the rights that we have, how women really have those rights and how they're defended.
En el orden jurídico existen todas las posibilidades, es decir, están aprobadas todas las leyes que defienden los derechos de la mujer.
We can say in the,
Contra la violencia, contra ella lo explicaba, cualquier tipo de violencia, lo mismo en el Código Penal, que en el Código de Procesos, que en el Código de Familia, es decir, en todas las leyes aprobadas en Cuba está la protección a la mujer como uno de los elementos fundamentales que tuvo en cuenta la sociedad para eso.
as Elmira had explained, that the laws defend the rights of women, and that applies to all the laws, to the criminal code, to the family code, to the civil code. The rights of women are defended in every aspect of the legal system in Cuba.
Bueno, creo que en sentido general, si usted, ¿alguna pregunta?
Yo estuve en Cuba cuando estuvo el proceso de votaciones y creo que sería muy interesante porque nuestro sistema, el sistema de Puerto Rico es igual que el de Estados Unidos, pero me gustaría si pudieras abundar más sobre la adopción en familias diversas.
I was in Cuba when the voting process was taking place. And in Puerto Rico, we have the same legal system as the United States has. So I was hoping you could say something about that, what's in Cuba and the new code in the question of the rights of adoption
Familias diversas.
of diverse families.
Sí. Eso evidentemente es otro de los logros muy bienvenidos en la legislación cubana en relación con el Código de la Familia. A ver,
That's one of the very welcome
no,
changes
porque
for families.
la adopción sí estaba aprobada desde el anterior Código de la Familia.
It's not that adoption wasn't allowed in Cuba before. It was in the old family code.
Pero la realidad, eso no ocurría. Es decir, como dije al principio, era necesario comenzar un proceso legislativo fuerte para cambiar y atemperar a lo que de verdad estaba ocurriendo.
It existed in the old law, but it wasn't really carried out. And it's what I was saying before about how the reality changed, but the law had to catch up. And that's what we were doing with this new code.
De manera tal que nada impide en este nuevo Código de las Familias que una familia diferente, es decir, creada por personas, primero se reconocen todos los tipos de familias,
And so,
todos.
so now adoption can take place in different kinds of families, all the different families that exist. They have the same rights for
Y
adoption.
tienen el mismo derecho a adoptar que puede tener cualquier otra familia, incluso las familias que más bien que no son consanguíneas, que son por afinidad, también se reconocen. Es decir, usted vivió toda la vida con un vecino y ese vecino se ocupó siempre de usted, y ese tipo de familia también se reconoce.
And all the different types of families are recognized, not just blood relations. But if you have no blood relation, but you're in a family all this time, that family is recognized. Relations.
No, I'm just thinking, we're not taking questions right now because we have two more presenters who have to start. So if we have another minute or so, and then we'll wrap up and we'll call our next speakers.
Bueno, no, ya yo en sentido general expuse lo que consideraba que era más importante.
I already said what I considered to be the most
Después, si
important
tienen
points.
alguna pregunta cuando terminen los demás, después
Saber si
A responder.
conocen del código. Algunas personas sí conocen, pero otras quizás no.
So some people know about the families code, maybe others don't.
Conocían del código, del proceso del nuevo.
You know about the process of the new families code.
es la ley por excelencia. A ver, no está por encima de la Constitución, eso nunca lo voy a decir. Pero
It's not above the
después
Constitution,
de la
but it's
Constitución, para mí no, para todos los juristas, es la ley más avanzada, más progresista, más completa, que además se atrevió a hacer una cantidad de cambios que
for us, it's the most advanced, the most
Indispensable.
progressive. It did all kinds of things that we thought weren't possible.
Folks, as we all know, we're running a little bit tight on time, so we are going to do 2 more sets of remarks, and then we won't have time for live Q&A, but what we will offer is on the US-Cuba Normalization's website, there's a contact form where you can submit your questions, and we'll make sure that all of our wonderful friends who are here are able to receive your questions and share out answers later so that we could still get you answers. So our next 2 speakers, I'll introduce them together, but we'll hear from them one at a time. We'll hear from Cindy Domingo first. Cindy is the chair of US Women and Cuba Collaboration, and she is the co-chair of the WILPF's Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee. And then we will hear after Cindy from Allison Bodine, who is part of the US-Cuba Normalization Conference Organizing Committee, Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, and executive member of Friends of Cuba Against the US Blockade. I do open the floor.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with the Federation of Cuban Women. For over 20 years, we have been working with the FMC. We have co-presented with them in panels in Europe, Sweden, in Latin America, in particular Bolivia, in Mexico, and of course, in the United States, especially at the Commission of the Status of Women, many times, every time they're able to come. How many of you are familiar with the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women? Good. All of you who are not should get to know about the Commission on the Status of Women, because that is the forum in which thousands of women from all over the world can learn about the breakthroughs that the FMC has been able to advance women's rights in their own country. Over 100 years ago, Jose Marti, Cuba's national hero, said that the struggles waged by nations are weak only when they lack support in the hearts of their women. Over 100 years ago. And that is why the Cuban Revolution has put at the center of its revolution the women's rights agenda. And as you can tell from what Osmaide and Nancy have talked about, they are the inspiration for especially women here in the United States, because they continue to roll back our rights as seen by the abortion rights agenda in this country. So that is why for over 20 years, we have worked with the Federation of Cuban Women. And I am proud to say that the US Women and Cuba Collaboration was able, for the only time in the 60 years of the blockade, to get a license, a visa for the Federation of Cuban Women to meet with us in retreat and to strategize and to go on a national tour back in 2003. Our mission of building a strong US women's movement and the US blockade against Cuba, because we hold up more than half of the sky in this country. We do more than half of the work. And so it is important that we continue to create mutually beneficial US-Cuba relations, and that our work continues to be rooted in the concept of universal human rights. I only have a few minutes to talk about what work that we have done. And obviously, we practice the right to travel. And over the years, every year minimally, except for during the pandemic, we have brought delegations of women and the people that love us Cuba to celebrate International Women's Day and Women's History Month. And we are going to do it once again in March of 2024. So if you are interested in joining us, interested in learning about the women's rights agenda, interested in working with the Federation of Cuban Women, join us next March. Our delegations focus on the work of the FMC. We travel the country from Havana to Santiago to meet with the different chapters of the Federation of Cuban Women. Frankly, we need a federation of US women similar to we focus on the Cuban women's rights agenda, and most importantly, we focus on LGBTQI rights in Cuba and the advancement, especially under the Families Code that has been made. And we have focused on bringing, we focus on lesbians and have done a lesbian delegation in which we met with lesbians from all over the country in a meeting a few years ago. If you cannot obviously join us, join one of the other brigades or delegations, but you will not forget when you travel with us. We have also in the past, but have been greatly hampered by the US government, really building, in terms of building solidarity with the Cuban women and allowing the Cuban women to speak for themselves. And we have in the past sponsored US speaking tours of Cuban women. And we should not give up on trying time and time again of getting visas for Cuban women to come into this country. We did a national tour of one of the leading lesbians from Santiago, both from the East Coast and West Coast. We have brought women cultural workers, and we will continue to do that. We have also sponsored different webinars with the Cuban ambassador. We give messages from people like Gretel from the Federation of Cuban Women, because they are not allowed to use Zoom or not allowed to come to this country. So you can check that out on YouTube. And I want to speak just for a moment our Lesbian and Allies Project. We do strategic outreach and educational programs for LGBT communities, and in particular, talking about the breakthroughs around the Families Code. And if you haven't read the Families Code, if you haven't read the Cuban Constitution, you must. You will then see what a constitution based in love, based on diversity, based on an expanded version of what a family is, who composes a family. You will understand and see what's the matter with our Constitution. If you are interested in the Lesbian and Allies Project, Goldman and Moon are the co-chairs of that project. In addition, we know that we need to advance global feminisms, and being at the UN Commission on the Status of Women, working with the Federation of Cuban Women. Thursday, we did a great webinar about media, how women need to utilize media, especially in light of the US blockade, and how the blockade hinders communication and the building of solidarity between women from all over the world, but especially in the United States and Cuban women. We work on CEDAW. Let me hear Jan.
Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, of which the United States is only one of 4 countries that is not ratified. Cuba was one of the first.
And so we continue to work in terms of trying to pass CEDAW in various cities. If you're interested in that, Jan Strout leads that project also. And we educate, endorse, and advocate for a US feminist foreign policy to end the patriarchal violence of militarism, white supremacy, and misogyny. The other organization that we represent is the Women's League for Peace and Freedom, the US section, which also has an international office. And it is the oldest women's peace organization, over 100 years old. And so we can conduct education with all of our US branches as well as our international sections. Lastly, ASERI, we are active members of ASERI, the Alliance for Cuban Respect and Engagement, ASERI. It was really heartbreaking how many people do not lobby their legislation body. So please, we're not going to have revolution by lobbying Congress, but we can make gains. Biden himself can change drastically the relationship between US and Cuba. Your Congress people can put that pressure on the president and Congress as a whole.
So please, in the calling of Biden this week, this next week, participate. Go on a series website and learn about why it's important that Biden takes Cuba off the list of state-sponsored nations. So, you know, I can't say it enough. Do it. Do it now. So lastly, you know, we're an all volunteer organization that works hard. If you can donate, we have cards, we'll pass them around and you can check out our website. We also have a packet of our Lesbian Allies project, and I have a few copies of this call to action. So thank you.
Allison Modine, next.
Hi, everyone. Good late afternoon. Thank you all for your patience and continued support as our workshops have moved a little bit later in the day. But I think we had a really excellent plenary session and now really just incredible presentations by our Cuban sisters and co-fighters. And I'm really looking forward to our work together, which will not be we won't have time for discussion today, unfortunately. But I know that we will continue to be in touch and everyone should come to the evening event tonight because we'll be able to exchange with each other and ask questions and everything.
Malcolm X Center.
Yeah, Malcolm X Center.
7 o'clock tonight.
7:30 doors, 8 o'clock program. So as Erin mentioned, my name is Allison Bodine. I am on the editorial board of the Fire This Time newspaper in Vancouver, Canada, and coordinator of the Fire This Time Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, as well as have been involved in the US-Cuba Normalization Conference Committee, helping to organize this cross-border international Cuba Solidarity event. And what I wanted to say today is that the world, women especially around the world, need Cuba. We know that our work against the blockade is vital, but I think it's important that we flip that narrative. It's not only that Cuba needs our solidarity, but we also, as women, as queer people, we need Cuba in order to build the better world that we all are fighting for. Cuba is an example of the gains that are possible in a revolutionary society, about the accomplishments that women can make when society sets the elimination of inequality as a real goal in law, in policy, and in action, and in communities, not just in one of those levels. That is why we must recognize our responsibility as women, as LGBTQIA+ people in North America to fight against the criminal US blockade on Cuba. The women who spoke earlier today have already given us so much information about the gains of women in Cuba during the revolution, about the Revolutionary Families Code, and how much we can learn from the process that went into that code, and hopefully can see it for ourselves when we're in Cuba the next time. But I wanted to talk a little bit, just to close our workshop today, about how we can bring Cuba to the women's movement and to the queer community. And I'm really thankful that Cindy went first, because we've already learned about so many ways, especially the important people-to-people exchanges that happen when we travel to Cuba against the travel ban, against the criminal blockade, and learn from Cuban women, trans women, queer people on the ground about their experiences. We must also work to educate people about the reality for women in Cuba. We must organize events about the gains of women in the Cuban Revolution. We've already started because we're here today. We have to discuss at these events about how abortion in Cuba is free and on demand at a time when women's rights to choose is being eroded in the United States. We have to talk about what we learned earlier, how majority of Cuba's national parliament, 53.4%, are women. Second in the world, then there's no quota. It's not a law. It doesn't have to be 50%. That's how Cuban society is organized and who the leaders are. In Canada, 30% of parliamentarians. In the United States, 27%. And apparently that jumped by 10% just 10 years ago. Before, it was even lower. It's important that if we're a member of an organization, also today, that we're active in media and social media. I can't stress that enough. We have to talk about the progress of Cuban women and LGBTQIA+ community on social media and in media at every chance we get, and attend events in the women's and queer rights movement. I just want to share an idea that maybe people can take to their own communities. For the past 15 years, Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba has been participating in the Vancouver Pride Parade and Festival and other Pride events. We bring our campaigns against the US blockade on Cuba, like we'll have their postcards there, we'll learn about more of these today, to these events. And we bring signs and banners and talk to people. 400 to 600,000 people attend the Pride Parade in Vancouver. They see these banners and we talk to them about Cuba and why Cuba is important. When people approach us to talk about Cuba, we can tell them about the gains Cuba has been making despite the difficulties in this criminal blockade imposed upon them. We can share about how in 2012, Adela Hernandez was the first openly trans person in Cuba to be elected. She was elected to the municipal party in Villa Clara province. We can talk about since 2007, gender affirmation surgery has been made available for free to trans people in Cuba under their universal health care system, and how people can change their identification as they need to without having those surgeries performed. We, as women, as queer people, as poor, working, and oppressed people in the US and Canada, have a lot to learn from Cuba. Some of us have been in this process of learning for many years, and some of us are just starting. But one thing is sure, US blockade, the travel ban, prevents countless opportunities for exchange and learning, and we have to fight that. Because it's also prevented people in Cuba from carrying other advances even further. I'd like to end with a quote from Mariela Castro, who is the president of the Cuban Center for Sexual Education, or CENASEX, also the daughter of Vilma Espín, the founder of the Cuban Federation of Women. And she was interviewed in the Toronto Star in 2015, and because she was in Canada as part of a World Pride Festival. And the Toronto Star asked her, what can we learn from Cuba? And she answered, one of the things Canadians can learn is Cuba is a country that has done a lot for their population with very little. Solidarity is a process that has been instituted as a result of the revolution. Those are the resources I am using to bring more opportunities to LGBT communities in Cuba. If the revolution has taught us to be just and have solidarity in many things, the revolution must also be responsible to demonstrate and teach the same themes related to LGBTQ rights. Cuban society has to be interested in what needs to be changed. As Fidel said, revolution is everything that needs to be changed. And I think here we have a very good idea of what needs to be changed. We're ready to unite and to fight it. Thank you again to all the panelists and our team.
That means there's blockade on Cuba. That's the most important thing that we can do here in the US and Canada and throughout the world is really lobby the United States to end the blockade that they've had against Cuba for all this for decades and stuff. Please, and the work to end the blockade.
Yeah.
I just jumped in, sorry.
These are the new postcard campaign from New York, New Jersey, Cuba C, and Friends of Cuba Against the US Blockade Vancouver, demanding Cuba is taken off the list of state sponsors of terrorism. another important case, because I'd be amiss as the coordinator of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, not to mention Alex Saab, a kidnapped Venezuelan diplomat held in US jail. We also have a postcard from the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign demanding his freedom. So I'll hand these out and look forward to talking with you all in the other workshops, which Aaron will give us a brief overview and then I can help direct people around. No problem. We'll get you. All right.
Thank you, everybody. I'm so sorry that things ran late. We didn't have a fighting chance after that plenary. That's all I can say. Cindy and Allison got to say, I'm sorry, we didn't have time for discussion. You can go to the website and put questions on. We will get it for our sisters to get answers. If you have questions that you're interested in, do come to the thing tonight over at the Malcolm X Center. Our compañeras will be there. There'll be time for dancing and a great panel and, presentation. Now, though, I think we need to go to our next quiz, right? Now is the work.
Yeah. Hi.
The schedule.
Yes, let's go ahead and press stop on our.
Okay, stop.
Bye, hon. Shot. Thanks for coming.